our assets. Vulnerabilities are internal weaknesses that a threat event or a threat agent could take advantage of. Impact is the last step, and that's just taking into account the asset's cost. And when we bring it all together, everybody that, well, I shouldn't say everybody, most people that drive have car insurance. Vulnerabilities are that when we have a car, we might have an older car that has bad brakes. That's an internal weakness, something that we can control. A threat is it's been raining heavily. That's something that we can't control. A risk comes when these two are put together. We're out driving and it's been raining heavily, and let's say we run into something and now the car is totaled and we are at a loss of $10,000. And this is the whole property of risk. We have our vulnerability, weak brakes, we have our threat and natural threat that is raining heavy, and the risk is when you put the two together. The impact is the $10,000 that is what the car is worth when it's been totaled. Risk management is the constant process. As assets are used, purchased, and retired, they must be assessed. And depending on your organization will depend upon how this process usually goes about, but there are generally 6 steps. You have to identify your assets, most important, and the first step. You don't know what to protect if you don't know where it is. You have to identify the threats. Now we have to look at those outside events that could affect our assets. We have to look at and assess the vulnerabilities, the internal weak.
Cheers, Panda. What's good, man? Yeah, I can't do all that. Drug tests and shit for work and all that. But cheers. Cheers, man.
Weaknesses of those assets. We put those together, we get our risk. And in order to help us mitigate our risk, we put countermeasures in place. And these measures that alleviate risk are called controls. Controls are divided up into 3 categories: physical, logical/technical, and administrative. Weaknesses of those assets. We put those together, we get that could affect our assets. We have to look at and assess the vulnerabilities, the internal weaknesses of those assets. We put those together, we get our risk. And in order to help us mitigate our risk, we put countermeasures in place. And these measures that alleviate risk are called controls. Controls are divided up into 3 categories: physical, logical/technical.
Thanks, Gemini. Me too. Part 1 is just doing the school shit. Kind of boring, but I just got access to my course today, so I can't really, I don't want to waste any time, you know what I mean?
and administrative. How do we protect our assets? We already discussed that there are controls that we can put in place, and the three flavors are, I'll say them again, physical, technical, logical, and administrative. Physical controls are, think of a lock, a fence, a door, guards, dogs, guard dogs. Technical controls are those devices and software that use to protect our assets, firewall, antivirus, IDS, IPS, DLPS, data loss prevention, DLP, data loss prevention. Administrative controls are policies that organizations create for governance. An example of setable use policy and email policies. And I'm also going to throw out there privacy policies as well. Incident response. Incident response is what happens when risk mitigation practices or risk management practices fail. And in incident response, we have 6 steps as well. We have the preparation phase. That is the phase that we're gathering together. Well, this might happen. This is the might phase, but we are planning for an incident to occur and we're preparing for it. Detection and analysis. This is where the action begins. This is where something is occurring. We don't know what it is, so we need to detect it and analyze it to properly put it in the right category. Is it an environmental event or is it an actual attack on our assets? Containment is containing this issue to a certain area. Eradication is dealing with or removing all effects from our environment. Containment is containing this issue to a certain area. Eradication
I know I'm
is
fucking
dealing with
97
or
today.
removing all effects from our environment. Recovery is putting the environment back to a state prior to the incident. And post-incident is post-mortem. This is usually overlooked and it's unfortunate because it's the lessons learned phase where we can go back and take a look at what we did right. Is post-mortem with or removing back on our assets. Containment is containing this issue to a certain area. Eradication is dealing with or removing all effects from our environment. Recovery is putting the environment back to a state prior to the incident. And post-incident is post-mortem. This is usually overlooked and it's unfortunate because it's the lessons learned phase where we can go back and take a look at what we did right, what we did wrong, and we can actually build upon this and improve. And last but not least, this is defense in depth. This happens when we put several of these different controls on top of one another to make it so that it's difficult for those on the outside or inside are trying to get at our assets. So remember our 3 types of controls. Defense in depth phase where we can go phase back, take a look at what we did wrong, and we can actually build upon this and improve. And last but not least, this is defense in depth. This happens when we put several of these different controls on top of one another to make it so that it's difficult for those on the outside or inside are trying to get at our assets. So remember our 3 types of controls: physical, logical, and administrative. We might have a lock on our server cabinets, and we might put several layers of authentication for our users, and we might have an acceptable user use policy. So that way, if there is an issue, we have these several overlapping layers. What is another to make it so that it's
What in the fuck? Jesus Christ.
Identify and authenticate. To identify is to claim who or what we are. Authentication is the act of proving who or what we claim to be. For example, a username is an identity claim, and the password authenticates that user and allows access. Identity, I'm sorry, identity verification is the half step between identity and authentication. And think of it as, when you're asked to show, a credit card, debit card, and then a government issue ID. That's not really authenticating you. That's just identity verification, which is an additional step of asking for another form of ID.
Cheers, Reese. Thanks, man. How you doing?
There are 5 different types of authentication. There's something that you know, username, password, PIN, something that you have, ID badge, swipe card, one-time password, something that you are, fingerprint, iris scan, retina scan, somewhere that you are, geolocation, IP address, location, coordinates, something that you do, that's handwriting, typing, walking, because we all do these things, all 3 of these examples, in a slightly different way. It could be the way that you do your O. It could be the amount of time that you
I'm
use
doing pretty good, man.
between each key when you're typing, or when walking, how long your strides are. And to go along with authentication, there are different levels of authentication that we can add on to our access controls. We have single, dual, and multi-factor. Single is just using one of the factors from the previous slide by itself. Dual factor is using 2 different factors. If you have a username, password, and a PIN.
Cheers, Daniel. How you doing, man?
By itself. Dual factor is using 2 different factors. If you have a username, password, and a PIN, that does not count as dual factor. That is single factor used 2 times. But if you have a username, password, and then a smart card, that's two different factors. That's dual factor authentication. And multi-factor is when we have three or more factors. So if we have a username, PIN, and then another PIN that's still just single factor. That's two PINs, username, password, that's still single factor, just being used three times. Or let's say we have a username, password, PIN, and then a one-time password that's dual factor authentication, again, just being used three times. A true multi-factor situation is when we have a username, password, something we know, a smart card, something that we have, and then a fingerprint scan, something that we are. So that is a true multi-factor situation where we have all three factors that are using three different forms of authentication. Now, mutual authentication is not the same as multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor is stacking those layers on top of each other to make sure that the access is strong as we need it to be. Mutual authentication is the process where both ends authenticate one another instead of, for example, just the uh, endpoint or the user authenticating to the server that they're logging into. For example, both the PC and the server authenticate to each other before data is sent in any direction. And the PC authenticates to the server with a username and password, and in kind, in the opposite direction, the server authenticates to the PC, sending that. So mutual authentication can also be mixed with multi-factor authentication because they are two different items. Remember, multi-factor, multiple factors to access one resource, be it something you have, something you are, something you know. Mutual authentication is when both endpoints authenticate each other. And we have mutual authentication to prevent man-in-the-middle attacks, whereas a bad actor or attacker can insert themselves into the traffic flow and compromise confidentiality and possibly integrity of the event because they're in the middle and they can actually see the full communication flow. Passwords, something that you know. Passwords are the most common form of authentication. Yes, we all have about, 1,800,000 of them, or at least you should have more than just one password that you use on multiple systems. I'm going to hit that in a second here. That's called manual synchronization. Passwords are very vulnerable if created without complexity requirements. And complexity requirements include numbers, letters, uppercase, lowercase, special characters. And it's also referred to as camel casing, but you want to make sure that you have complex passwords because complex passwords are the countermeasure against brute force attacks when you have a process that's just trying to guess all possible combinations. And if you're using dictionary words, it makes it really easy for brute force attackers to just guess which password you have. Password managers are programs that store all the user's passwords in one case with master password. Think of it as a skeleton key that unlocks the key for all the other keys, or a master key that unlocks the password for all the other passwords. And just to touch on what I said earlier, manual password synchronization is when a user synchronizes passwords from multiple systems without a software application. This should not be done. Yes, it's convenient. Yes, it makes it easy, but a breach for one could end up being a breach for all based off of one bad password. Biometrics. Bio
Oh shit. Oops.
Biometrics. Biometrics are authentication factors that use physical features. Biometrics are defined by seven different features. Universality, sorry about that mispronunciation there. Uniqueness, permanence, collectability, performance, acceptability, and circumvention. Universality stipulates that we should be able to find our chosen biometric characteristic in the majority of the people that we expect to enroll into the system. Uniqueness is how unique the particular characteristic is among the individuals enrolled. Permanence is how well the characteristic resists change over time. Collectability, how easy it is to accurately collect the characteristic. Performance is a set of metrics on how well to judge the system focus. Acceptability is the measure of how a particular characteristic is acceptable to the users for the system. And circumvention is how easy it is to circumvent or falsify the biometric information. And I want to give an example of these seven. For example, let's talk about a fingerprint reader. Fingerprint readers are easy to install, they're unique, they're universally accepted, they do persist over time with little change, they're easy to collect. Performance-wise, there is going to be a storage issue with having all those there. Acceptability is also easy for the users to access the system with that. Circumvention is it could be easier to circumvent a fingerprint reader compared to that of I'm going to go on the opposite end of the spectrum and go really extreme, let's say a blood sample. Now, it's universally acceptable because everybody has blood. It is unique. Your blood is unique to you because it has your DNA. It might be very hard to give a blood sample every time you want to access the system. Blood doesn't usually change over the course of a long period of time. And as far as performance goes, nobody really wants to give a blood sample every time that we want to access a system. So, and this is where this particular example breaks down. So you can see when you're dealing with
Why the fuck
biometrics,
not? Why don't you want to take a blood test every time you want to log into your Gmail, bro? It's fucking easy. It's easy shit, man. Just take a blood test every time you want to get into your email or your Facebook.
it has to be universally acceptable. As far as performance goes, nobody really wants to give a blood sample every time that we want to access a system. So, and this is where this particular example breaks down. So you can see when you're dealing with biometrics, it has to be universally acceptable and not that easy to circumvent. But more importantly, it has to be acceptable for your users because Quite frankly, nobody wants to give a blood sample just to check their ATM machine. Hardware tokens, something that you have. Hardware tokens are physical devices that generate a one-time password. And when I mean a physical device, it is a device that you actually hold. You press the button and it gives you your OTP one-time password. Software tokens are applications that generate uh, a one-time password, and that can be on your phone, computer, or any other device where the software is actually doing it. And just as I said, one-time passwords are passwords that expire after a set time frame or one-time usage. Identify and just as I said, one-time passwords are passwords that expire after a set time frame or one-time usage.
Cheers, Luffy. What's good, man? I feel that. Oh God. Well, I feel the first part. It's my birthday and I'm fucking studying. Just better to not waste time, you know what I mean? Yeah, I do feel that first part though. Yeah. Also waiting for a fucking shit for work. So I'm stressing about that. So stressing on your birthday and doing schoolwork really fucking great ways to wanna fucking, sorry though.
After a user is identified and
Hey buddy, what the fuck? Jesus fuck's sake. Sorry to hear that. It is unfortunately a real fucking thing, broski.
after a user is identified and then authenticated, the next step is authorization. Authorization is what the user can access, modify, and delete. Principle of least privilege is the lowest level of authorization allowed for a user to perform duties. Violation of the principle of least privilege is a user having more than necessary access to perform the duties assigned. This user can allow bad actors to cause damage to the production data. And I want to expand upon this. The violation of the principle of least privilege can also be called creeping privileges and usually happens when
Creeping privileges is funny. Nah, for real. Yeah. It's true, man. It's very fucking true. A lot of us laugh and joke around, but actually, when happy birthday, go you. Blessed day, man. Thanks, sir. I appreciate that, brother. Hope you as well.
production data, and I want to expand upon this. The violation of the principle of least privilege can also be called creeping privileges and usually happens when an individual or a user has been at an organization for a set period of time and has transitioned into several different roles without an actual audit of the authorization taking place. And this can cause to that creeping privileges. Roles without an actual audit of the authorization taking place. And this can cause to that creeping privileges.
Basically, all that means is some asshole who's like worked their way up through security, and then they could fuck with the shit. If you're wondering, probably not, right? we'll be doing like a regular birthday stream later. I kind of like doing this because it keeps me awake. Like if you guys are talking to me and shit, so I don't fall asleep just listening to fucking lectures.
Organization for a set period of time and has transitioned into several different roles without an actual audit of the authorization taking place. And this can
You know
cause
what?
to
I'll actually be right back.
that creeping privileges. There are four basic tasks that we want to carry out in access control: allowing access, denying access, limiting access, and revoking access. Allowing is just giving a particular party access to the given resource. Denying is simply the opposite of allowing access. Limiting access basically limits the access up to a certain point. Maybe sandbox limitations are put in place just for that particular resource, user, application, entity, or whatever the object is of that the object is accessing. Revoking is taking away access once a user is terminated or a program is terminated. And it might not necessarily always be termination. It could be, again, that job change role. Whereas we had Jim who was in accounting and now he's over in IT. So we might have to revoke his accounting privileges and make sure we change them into his IT privileges. Access control list, often referred to as ACLs, are a very common choice for implementing access control. ACLs are usually to control access in a file system on which our operating systems run on and control the flow of traffic into the networks from which our systems are attached. And when we look at ACLs, we usually have three sets of permissions that come with them. It's read, allowing us to read the contents of the file, write, allowing us to write to the file or directory, and execute to run the contents of the file, being that a script or some sort of software application. Five, to run the contents of the file, being that a script or some sort of software application. Network ACLs. When we look at a variety of activities that take place on our network, both public and private, we again see ACLs regulating the activity. In the case of network ACLs, we are particularly see that they're controlled by identifiers that we use being IP addresses and media access control MAC addresses and ports. Permissions on these types of ACLs are binary in nature and they either deal with allowing or denying. There's no in between with it. It's either a 1 or a 0, on or off. capability-based securities, one or zero that we were just talking about with network ACLs, where ACLs define the permissions based on the given resource. And identity, there is a set of permissions, all generally held from a file of some sort. Capabilities are orientated around the use of that token for our access. So for example, let's say access to the data center. Now we might have visitor access, which is just a temporary 1 day pass, but we're still going into the same data center. Whereas a visitor, we might only have so many hours that we can go in. Whereas if we worked in a data center, we might have access from, oh, let's say 8 to 5 if we're first shift. And then if we're management, we might have access around the clock to come in after hours if there is an issue. And access to the based on the given resource. And identity, there is a set of permissions, all generally held from a file of some sort. Capabilities are orientated around the use of that token for our access. So for example, let's say access to the data center. Now we might have visitor access, which is just a temporary 1 day pass, but we're still going into the same data center. Whereas a visitor, we might only have so many hours that we can go in. Whereas if we worked in a data center, we might have access from, oh, let's say 8 to 5 if we're first shift. And then if we're management, we might have access around the clock to come in after hours if there is an issue. The confused deputy problem. The confused deputy problem is a common type of attack that uses system ACLs. The crux of the confused deputy problem is seen when the software has a greater level of permissions to access a resource than the user controlling the software. We can often trick the user that is using it to misuse the software that has greater authority and potentially carry out an attack. Often, two types of confused deputy problems that we see are cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery. I apologize there. Cross-site scripting is another attack totally, and clickjacking. cross-site request forgery. I apologize there. Cross-site scripting is another attack totally. And clickjacking. Cross-site request forgery is an attack that misuses the authority of the browser on the user's computer. If the attacker knows or can guess a website that a user might already be authenticated to, perhaps such as Amazon, they can attempt to carry out a cross-site scripting attack. This is done by embedding a link into the web page or HTML based email, generally a link or image in which the user is directed to without their knowledge, then the application begins to run some command line behind the scene. Whereas clickjacking is where you have a user who is going to a particular site and the bad actor has already taken control of a certain portion of the site. So now the user going to that portion that the bad actor now controls, the bad actor can layer a invisible frame or an invisible window on top of a legitimate link. And once the user clicks on it, can actually run scripting code in the background to carry out the attack against the user. Access control models. And there are 5 different access control models that we're going to discuss: discretionary, mandatory, rule-based, role-based, attribute. Discretionary access control models. And there are five different access control models that we're going to discuss: discretionary, mandatory, rule-based, role-based, attribute. Discretionary access control, DAC, is the access control model based on being determined by the owner of the resource in question. And it's very common in Microsoft where you own the file and you're allowing other users on the computer or network to actually allow them access to the file. Mandatory access control is a model based on whether or not the owner of the resource does not get to decide who it is, unlike DAC, but is actually file and you're allowing other users on the computer or network to actually allow them access to the file. Mandatory access control is a model based on whether or not the owner of the resource does not get to decide who it is, unlike DAC, but is actually control is set up by a group or a individual authorizing authority on the resources that may or may not own it. And you control is set up by a group or a individual authorizing authority on the resources that may or may not own it. And you see this a lot more common in larger environments, especially military. I really think Department of Defense right here when I think of mandatory access control. Rule-based access control is similar to that of the ACLs that we were talking about dealing with firewalls and routers. It's that very basic binary on, off, allow, or deny. Role-based access control is similar to that of Mac, but it's set based upon the user's role within the organization. So for an example, if you have a clerical staff at the front of a doctor's office, they would have certain permissions assigned to their role dealing with billing and patient information, whereas the provider in the back may only be able to see the access their patient records dealing with their medical treatment. Attribute-based access control is based on the attributes, and whereas this one is more along the lines of the context at which somebody is trying to access the resource. So you must be this tall to ride. That's based off of your height. It could be you may have to be geolocated from somewhere in the US with a particular kind of IP address. It might be the type of time that it might be the time of day in which you're trying to access this resource in which you can be denied. So attribute based is based off of context. And sometimes when one access control level isn't enough, you have to layer them on top of each other. And we're going to specifically look at three different types of multi-level access control, which is the Bell-LaPadula model. Forgive me for my pronunciation there. The Biba model and the Brewer-Nash model. The Bell-LaPadula Lapita Laputa model, forgive me for my pronunciation there, the Biba model, and the Brewer-Nash model.
Okay. Mm.
Laputa model, forgive me for my pronunciation there, Laputa, and the Bell model is a combination of discretionary access control and mandatory access control that primarily deals with confidentiality. And the best way to sum this model up is there is no read up and no write down. In short, this means that we are handling classified information. We cannot read any higher than our security clearance, and we cannot write classified data down to a lower clearance level. The Biba model is the exact opposite of the Bell model, and the Biba model focuses on integrity of the data. So the way I remember it is Bell confidentiality, Biba integrity. And to summarize this particular model, it says no read down, no write up. And this might seem counterintuitive when we are considering protecting information, but remember that we have changed the focus from confidentiality to integrity. In this case, we want to make sure that
Didn't we
this
just say the
no
same fucking
confident
thing
the
for Bell
biblical or
model?
clearance level.
Oh, shit.
The BIBA model is the exact opposite of the Bell model, and the BIBA model focuses on integrity of the data. So the way I remember it is Bell confidentiality, BIBA integrity. And to summarize this particular model, it says no read down, no write up. And this might seem counterintuitive when we are considering protecting information, but remember that we have changed the focus from confidentiality to integrity. In this case, we want to make sure that enforce the integrity by ensuring that our resource can only be written to by those of a high level of access, and that those with a high level of access do not access a resource from a lower classification. The Brewer-Nash model, also known as the Chinese wall model, is an access
The China wall model. Really? Fuck. Is it a paid apprenticeship? Because like I gotta, I gotta have whatever's paying and whatever's fast and paying. How did my name come up over there? What the fuck?
classification. The Brewer-Nash model, also known as the Chinese wall model, is an access control model that is designed to prevent
Really? Wait,
conflicts of interest.
what? Had my application. From when? What? It must have been from fucking like a decade ago or something. What the fuck? Unless you're thinking of. Wait, what? I haven't applied to any lately. Last time I applied to a tattoo shop was like, I don't know, yeah, probably like 10 years ago. The card store. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. Well, I emailed him. Yeah. Huh. The fuck? That's cool. Word gets around, huh?
With a high level of access, do not access a resource from a lower classification. The Brewer-Nash model, also known as the Chinese wall model, is an access control model that is designed to prevent conflicts of interest. And again, this is another data integrity model. Objects are resources such as files or information pertaining to the single organization, company groups, all objects pertaining to a particular organization, and conflict classes, all groups of objects that contain competing parties. For example, if you have a law firm that take, and this law firm has several attorneys there, and you had the attorneys that take on two clients that are on opposing ends of a court case. So, in order to protect the non-compete clause, you have to make sure that both of these cases are completely separate from one another and that neither attorney can actually gain an advantage by looking at the other client's data files and logs.
If you want to get back into that, go back to where. Yeah, just ask him if it's paying and how soon he would want someone. I mean, they would have to pay a certain amount. You know, I mean, I gotta make bread, but thanks, Joe. I appreciate it, brother. I'll have a regular live later with the, be celebrating my birthday and shit. I just wanted to get on here and do this live because it keeps me like awake while I'm doing this shit. Um, new job here. 16. Dude, do it. Why not? Fuck it. Right now, I'm just doing a single course. It's like a 2-month course, but if I can get it done sooner, the better. You know what I mean? They offered a bunch of shit. Like I could have done something really easy, uh, but I might as well do something that's good. This is actually the first course in the cybersecurity course, so I figured, fuck it, I'll do that. Transfers over as a IT credit, so it's like I'm starting early. You know what I mean? Only 25 still. Got time. Yeah, dude. You can go to college at fucking 40, you know what I mean? If you don't plan on fucking blowing your brains out or getting a brain eating amoeba anytime soon, like it's never really too late. Ugh, I'm getting hungry as fuck.
Either attorney can actually gain an advantage by looking at the other client's data files and logs. Physical access controls often around controlling the movement in and out facilities. And one of the most common physical access controls deals with that of tailgating or piggybacking, depending upon the resource that you use. Tailgating is when we see somebody that is following very closely behind another person who is just authenticated with a badge, and that other person might not have any kind of identification or anything on them. Or we step outside for a quick second, we see somebody struggling with a box, and they're just asking us to hold the door while they come in. But again, you don't see any kind of authorization to actually allow that person in. So once we actually allow that person in without having that clearance and that authorization, they have just performed a tailgating or a piggybacking scenario to gain unauthorized access into the facility.
God damn.
Hey everyone, it's Matt from Practice Labs. I'm going to give you a brief walkthrough and introduction to the Practice Labs platform using one of our most popular titles, CompTIA A+ 2201002. You may have accessed the Practice Labs platform by clicking a link in your education provider or organisation's website, via a learning management system or LMS, or perhaps you logged in directly using your username and password. The first thing you'll see when you land on the Practice Labs homepage will be your list of available Practice Lab titles on the left. This may include some of our major vendors such as Cisco, CompTIA, Microsoft or VMware. The list of titles you see may differ from what I'm showing here. If we now take a look at the options that are available to us across the top, the next one will be the Exercise tab, where the content for the module will be displayed once we've selected our lab title. The next tab will be Exam Prep, which you may or may not see depending on if you have any Exam Prep titles assigned to your account. Next is the Additional Features tab, where you can view your Exam Prep and lab reports. Then it's the Settings and Customization tab, where you can view and configure settings for your practice lab environment. And lastly is the Help and Support tab, where you can view useful documentation, user guides, support videos, and get details on how to contact our support team. Now let's jump into this CompTIA A+ Core 2 lab title. When you click through into the lab, you'll see a brief introduction and a list of available modules. When you select Module 1, Operating System Types and Features, you'll be presented with a list of exercises contained within this module. Why don't we click on the Start button to dive into this lab? This takes us to the Exercise tab that I mentioned earlier, where we can see the content you'll be working through to complete the module. To move through the exercises, use the Next and Previous buttons located at the bottom left of the content panel. Before you get into the exercises, you'll be presented with the lab topology diagram that shows you what you'll have access to during the lab. As it says in the content, you may or may not use all of the devices. We can then continue through the exercises using the lab devices we have at our disposal to carry out the tasks requested. Once finished, use the Done button to mark the module as complete. Whilst waiting for PLAB DC01 to power on, we can see there are a couple of switches on each of the other devices. Power on and refresh. I'm now going to go ahead and power on the Linux CentOS device to give you an idea of a multiple device lab with different operating systems. Located at the bottom of the lab toolbar is the lab session timer, as well as 3 other buttons: power on all devices, reset all devices, and log out. Now that the domain controller device has powered on, there are a few new switches that have appeared: power off, reboot, reset, and suspend. At the top of the lab toolbar are 2 buttons: toggle content and fit device to window. We can now look at the devices themselves in more detail and explore the features they offer. Starting with the device toolbar, we have the option to toggle auto login, switch to console mode, reconnect to the device, show some information, or hide the device from view. These options may differ though, depending on the device and lab type you're using. Inside of the device is a menu that provides access to a virtual keyboard, which is especially useful for touchscreen devices, an information panel that provides details of your connection, the ability to send a Ctrl-Alt-Delete command, which is helpful when trying to unlock a device, and we can enable a right-click within the lab when using devices without this functionality, such as mobile phones or tablets. And that brings us to the end of this quick overview. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.
just realized my shit's fucked. I wish I could show you guys what's going on here, but it's probably not. Probably not a good idea. Was it still saying to start? That's for this fucking test. just pass this coast. Tadish. That's the first section passed. Thanks for chilling with me. If you chilled with me during that, holy shit. I'm gonna go eat some sushi. Birthday sushi. Yeah, I'll be back. I'm done with school for today now, so we're good. All right, peace the fuck.
Y'all gonna be spin poppin'.